53 people.
Let's see that audience. Let's see that audience. Let's
Here
see.
we go. Okay, just.
Excellent. Wow, this is going fast.
I use the admit all button. So.
What a useful button. I like it. Hi, all. Good to see you. You're all muted when you come in, but feel free to unmute and say hello. We're going to get started in a couple of minutes, but we wanted to make sure you guys can already connect at this point.
Hi, folks.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome.
Hi.
Looking forward to this.
We are too.
Yes. And Tom has given us a nice Christmassy background as well, so we can all be in the holiday spirit.
I was just watching a hawk out my living room window coming in for the chickadees trying to eat.
Uh-oh.
I felt sort of bad. You know, it's survival of the fittest out there.
That's right.
Have you-
Gotta eat too.
We have a bird feeder right near our window, so our cat usually sits in front of it twitching and making meowing noises.
Waiting
I
for an
can't get to them.
opportunity.
What a tease.
Mhm.
We had one of those bird feeders where it suctions onto the window, but we found that at about like 4:30 in the morning, a few birds would like to sit on it and like crack open the nuts right there. A nice little wake up call. We had to move it.
You don't realize how sensitive our hearing is when we start hearing bird seeds crack open.
Mhm.
Funny. So where are you guys at? I'm in Massachusetts.
Mhm.
I'm in Concord.
I'm in California on lockdown.
North Carolina on lockdown.
Here in New York.
Nice.
Nashville,
I'm from
Tennessee.
Monterrey, Mexico.
Very nice.
Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Albuquerque, New Mexico. So hi, neighbor.
Hi there.
Atlanta, Georgia. We're not on lockdown.
Vermont.
That's what makes us whole.
South
I'm from
Carolina.
DC.
Hello?
Vermont.
Wow.
Staten Island, New York.
Palm
New
Beach,
Jersey.
Palm Beach, Florida.
Broughton, Massachusetts.
Las Vegas, Nevada.
Reno, Nevada.
Charlottesville, Virginia.
Pocatello, Idaho.
Lexington, Kentucky.
Morehead,
Kentucky.
Springfield, Mass.
Nice.
Little River, South Carolina.
Petoskey, Michigan.
Jacksonville, Florida.
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Pine Top, Arizona.
Rancho Santa Margarita, California.
Santa Margarita.
It's in Orange County.
Newark, New Jersey.
Detroit,
Indiana, PA. Indiana, PA, go Steelers.
Where in
Go
the
Steelers.
world? Yeah, this is great. This is so possible that all of us are together.
So true.
The wonders of modern science. Yeah.
Richmond, Virginia, home of the best recovery center in the nation.
That's right, John Shinhauser. Good to see you, John.
Hey now, John.
I recognize that voice.
It's quite distinct, isn't it?
Yes.
I don't know where I get it from. I picked it up from the Cajun boards I used to run with.
So we're going to give us a few more minutes. We had almost 600 folks register, so we want to give people a chance to trickle in as we're getting ready.
Wow.
Hi.
Plymouth, Massachusetts, America's hometown.
Hola, Angela.
Hello, my friend.
Good to see you. I haven't seen you in a while.
Yes, yes. Very good to see you and everybody else. We're like across the country right now, Ephraim.
That's right.
Hi,
Hello.
Ephraim.
Dr. Kelly, how are you?
Hello. I'm well.
Efraín,
felicidades.
Hi, Windia.
Hi, Angela. Hi, Ephraim.
How you doing, Windia? Good to see you.
Hi, Ephraim. Hi, Windia. Hi, Angela.
Hello, Julia.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy
Felicidades,
holidays.
Julia.
Hola, ¿cómo está? Felicidades.
Bien, bien.
Oh, sí, te ves cambiado, ¿ah?
That's right.
It's a new look, huh?
Tom, where'd you go?
Yes, sir.
I saw Tom on here a minute ago. Where'd he go?
I'm up here.
Hi, Tom.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, friend.
Good to see you, my friend.
Dios bendiga, padrino.
Okay.
¿Viste? It's Julie.
I know, sweetie. I heard you. Say hi.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Welcome.
We've got about 5 or 6 others sitting in here, so too.
Perfect.
I'm not sure how to sign in.
You're in.
You're in. We're hearing you.
Okay, okay. Hello, everybody.
Hello. Welcome.
This is the largest Zoom meeting I've ever been on. Ditto.
It is very festive to see everybody come together to do this together. So I love it.
Hi, Bettina.
Hi, Abuya. How are you? You're good, but enjoying the snow.
Wonderful. Philip is on.
Mm-hmm.
The chat is running like crazy.
Yeah. And just so you all know, we are recording the chat, and we, like last time, we did not put the chat on the website. So the slides are on the website and will be available for you all to download. And the video recording of our presentation is also will be available for downloading. For the chat, we decided to make that only available to people who email us directly and who have been pre-registered, just because you all are sharing your contact information and so forth. So we just want to keep all your data, your personal information private. So you yourself can request a copy, and we'll be happy to send the chat to you. And we'll get going in just a minute. Meanwhile, I just want to say that we will be holding questions until at the end for Tom. But if you want to put your thoughts down as you're listening, feel free to put it in the chat. Hazel and Katie and I will be monitoring it and keeping track of them, so we can then repeat them back to Tom at the end when we're doing some questions and answers. So feel free to use the chat box to put your thoughts down, your comments and your questions. And of course, certainly also just say it at the end and say it directly.
And the next one in the series is going to be January the, what is it, Bettina?
15th.
January the 15th. So put that in your calendars. That's going to be the next one in the series, January 15th, 2021. Let's hope we can all make that successfully. It'd be great to see you. We have Patty, right, speaking? Patty McCarthy Metcalf, head of Faces and Voices, will be talking in that one. So, but we'll send out more information. I just want to mention that for January 15th at noon Eastern.
Perfect. All right, I think we should get going. So what I will do first is I'm going to just give you the overarching background. Some of you have already heard it in terms of what we want to do with this overall project, to give you some background info, and then we'll jump right in. John is going to introduce our wonderful guest speaker, Tom, and we'll take it from there. So Hazel, could you bring up the quick intro slides for us?
Can you all see these?
I can. How about the rest of you?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, perfect. So welcome all. I'm Bettina Höppner, and John Kelly and I are the principal investigators of this project, which is an R24 funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And what we're hoping to do over the next 5 years is to basically.
Yeah, are you showing your face?
I should be. Can you see? So the slides should be up. Our goal is to look at the role of recovery community centers in initiating and sustaining. Oh, actually, sorry, it's your topic today. Our role is really to talk about recovery community centers and to facilitate activities to build the research infrastructure. If you can go to the next slide. So we have two specific goals. We want to engage you all, and there's multiple RCC stakeholders in recovery community centers. And a lot of the times we're all siloed, we all only talk to our closest colleagues, and there isn't a lot of chance to really talk across groups. So our goal is to get us all together. And by all, I mean anybody who contributes to or can benefit from the support that RCCs can provide. And we want to engage everybody in research advancing activities. So that's these seminars. It's also going to be pilot funding to start doing some data collection and data sharing, about advisory board meetings on how we're doing. And then I'll also be working directly with some folks on actually helping you collect data, ask questions, and doing research at your own recovery community centers. So that's one of our goals. The goal is to engage us all in activities and enhance in discussion and figure out where we need to go from here. And the second goal for us is to disseminate the tools that we are gathering. So as you know, we're recording the seminar and all of our seminars and then put them on the website so you guys can watch them later and share them with colleagues. Beyond that, we are also collecting papers that might be relevant or scales you can use as you're thinking about how to evaluate things and so forth. So we really just want to have a repository available for everybody. Next slide, please. And our steering committee is diverse. We are a group made up of scientists, clinicians, RCC leadership, and persons with lived experience from multiple organizations and institutions from across the US. Several of us are from a Recovery Research Institute, but we are from various places, and you probably recognize some of these faces and names up here. So that's who we are. And the steering committee, we get together to pick topics, to decide where we're going next, and you can certainly reach out to any one of us for thoughts and comments that you have. Next slide, please. What we're doing today is we do want to have discussion, but we also want to give you guys useful information. So what's going to happen is that Tom will be presenting his presentation for 40 minutes, and then we will be having a discussion. And given that we took a little time in the intro there, probably 15 minutes of discussion. And we really do want to hear from you and hear your comments about what the topic was and your favorite thoughts upon what you just heard and listened to. And before I keep going here, Hazel, could you do our quick slide about who is here? Because I mentioned we want to have multiple stakeholders, so we just want to kind of, oh, here we go, perfect. It's the next slide already. If you guys could just take a moment and check all the boxes that apply to you. Several of you probably have multiple hats, and just kind of say which one of these roles fits for you. And then we're going to display the results back for everybody to see in terms of who's in the Zoom room today. All right, how are we looking, Hazel?
We have 65% have voted, so maybe we can give it like a few more seconds.
For sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so this is the first time I've ever been on a webinar, so I'm a little quiet and a little
shaky. But I'm a retired clinician
Good to have you.
from New York.
We're at 85% now. Should I end the poll?
Yep, I think that would be good.
And I'm going to share the results.
Perfect. Can everybody see that? So you can see here that we do have multiple groups here. We have RCC participants and leaders. We have clinicians. We have scientists. One of our major focuses for our initiative is really also to focus on medications for opioid use disorder. And we're hoping to provide continuing medical education credits in the future for that, but that's an unfolding story. So you can see that we're a diverse group of people. And when you're thinking about questions you have, think also not just about Tom, but the other people in the group if you want to ask one of these other groups a question directed at them, because we have shared expertise in our room right now, which is exciting. All right, Hazel, next slide. I think it's probably it for me, right? There's one more. So these are the resources to come. I mentioned those already in terms of slides and recordings and repositories of scales. So that is to come. And John already mentioned that we'll be sending you all an email for our next seminar coming up. And at this point, I want to turn it over to Dr. John Kelly, who is the other principal investigator on this overall project. And he will introduce our fabulous speaker today. So John, over to you.
Thank you so much, Bettina. Great to see everybody. Hope you can hear me okay. Welcome. So glad you're here from all over the country. I'm delighted and honored to present today our fabulous guest speaker, Mr. Tom Hill. Many of you know Tom. Tom's been around in the field for many, many years, been very influential. It's been an inspiration personally to me, and I know to many people like me. So I'm really flattered and honored that Tom agreed to do this for us. Tom also graciously agreed to serve on our advisory committee for the project here. So we're delighted about that, to have Tom's input. So just a little bit of background about Tom. He is the current Vice President of Practice Improvement at the National Council for Behavioral Health. He previously served as a presidential appointee in the position of Senior Advisor on Addiction and Recovery to SAMHSA, and was a former acting director of the U.S. Center for Substance Abuse Treatment. He's also served as a technical assistant director for numerous SAMHSA treatment and recovery support grant initiatives, and served as for 4 years as director of programs for Faces and Voices of Recovery. He's won numerous awards throughout the years, including the Johnson Institute America Honors Recovery Award, and the NALGAP Advocacy Award, and a Robert Wood Johnson Fellowship in Developing Leadership in Reducing Substance Abuse Initiative. And just delighted, Tom. Thank you for doing this. I'm looking forward to your talk. Over to you.
Thanks, John. Oh, wow. Boy, am I overwhelmed today. It is certainly recovery is in the house. I recognize lots of new and old faces, and I'm just so happy to be here and part of this initiative. A couple of things before I start. I just want to let you know that if you want to use these slides, I'm assuming it's okay with Recovery Research Institute, but I always offer whatever I create to people to use in your communities, with your stakeholders, anything that you can use in an educational way. I create it not only for myself, but for everybody. So please feel free to use it. And then secondly, you know, I see so many people and so many projects that I know, and this presentation brushes the treetops. So if I haven't included your project, email me and tell me, here's my email right there, and let me know what your center is doing right now so that I can include that in future and longer presentations. And I just want to, make that offering to people in terms of there's so much going on across the country now in 2020 that, it's like, I might not know all of it. So I would love to be more aware of what's going on everywhere. So let's move on to the presentation. Next slide. So I wanted to start off with, a definition of a sense of community, because that's what's, so important that we create and that we are creating in the recovery community is, I use this definition. Sense of community is a feeling that members have of belonging, a feeling of members have to one another and to the group, and a shared faith that members' needs will be met through their commitment to be together. And I think that that's just a really sweet definition of what it is that we are part of and what it is that we're continually creating. Let's move to the next slide. So when we talk about a sense of community, and then we talk about places where that happens, and I think this idea of a place is so important, and it comes out of a rich history and legacy of, there's a whole history of settlement houses in our country that were really at the turn of the last century were formed to indoctrinate and help immigrants in urban areas sort of acclimate to the new surroundings. Fraternal orders, neighborhood social clubs, affinity groups that are like ethnically oriented. We have a picture of the Italian American Community Center in Syracuse, New York there. Boys and girls clubs, lots and lots of different kinds of centers where people go to do things together and to be together. So a rich history of that. And then we'll move to the next slide. Then we're going to talk about 3 different types of centers, just as a little foundation before we talk about recovery community centers. We'll talk about senior centers, we'll talk about LGBTQ plus community centers, and we'll talk about mental health clubhouses. And then we'll move into the second phase, which will be more about recovery community centers. So let's go to the next slide. So, I always say that every community, every neighborhood has a senior center, right? It's something that we all take for granted. We all applaud. We know that the reason they're there. We know the purpose. We value them. We fund them, and it's designed for a particular group, age appropriate, and it serves a set of functions. But above all, the people are connected to people like themselves, and people have an affinity with the people that they go to be with at those centers. So the first center opened in 1943 in New York City. By 1961, there were 218 centers nationwide. And then the big turning point, legislation, advocacy, policy, right? 1965, the Older Americans Act that actually put aside funding for senior centers that went from national to state to local levels. And then by 2020, there are 11,000 centers nationwide. So let's go to the next slide. And then, so not only are there senior centers, but there's a national organization that oversees all of those. So the National Council for Aging, that's a national advocacy and resource organization, put together the National Institute on Senior Centers. And this supports over 3,000 senior centers, promotes research, promising practices, professional development, advocacy, and offers an accreditation program. Let's move on to the next slide. Some of the services and programs that happen are, again, they're age appropriate, but that programming is really important to look at in terms of what kinds of resources, skill building, education is offered, and in what ways is it offered. And I just want to point out that this volunteer and civic engagement, because that goes to the heart of our community in terms of giving people those opportunities to to give back, to do service, and to be useful and purposeful. That's a really important thing for people that are retired or are in an aging environment, that they have that feeling. But it's an important feeling for many people in the recovery community also. Let's go to the next slide. So the impact on participants is pretty remarkable. There's measurable improvements in all levels of health, physical, social, emotional, spiritual. There's a sense of empowerment that happens with folks. Chronic diseases get delayed or are diffused, certainly managed in an environment like that. And then the social networking that happens within and outside the center. Again, that sense of belonging, that sense of being part of something larger, that sense of affinity with people who have been through a similar experience, maybe historical that you have, that you can share those experiences with. You're not alone, you're not isolated. On. So just wanted to do, I talked about the advocacy and the Older Americans Act that happened in 1965. As a result of that, there are programs and funding for those programs through federal, state, and local government. that filters down. And then, you know, a range of other diverse portfolio of funding, always important to look at in terms of sustainability for any kind of center or any kind of program. And then, of course, always the in-kind and volunteer hours that you know, I learned from CCAR that we're going to talk about in a little while, the value of clocking in those volunteer hours in a monetary way to be able to demonstrate to the community and to community stakeholders that that is a definite resource for funding. Let's go to the next slide. So we're going to move on and talk about LGBT community centers. So 1971, two parts of the country, two very different communities started LGBT community centers. The big fancy one is in Los Angeles. That's gone through a number of iterations in terms of buildings and locations. And then the townhouse in Albany that's been the same since 1970. And you know, if you think about what happened in the LGBT community, 1969, Stonewall Rebellion was a big turning point. And in the 70s, a lot of infrastructure building started happening, including including LGBT community centers. This idea that that people deserve to live open, fulfilling, and honest lives, free of discrimination and bigotry. Does that sound familiar to you all? And access to culturally appropriate services as equal partners in the cultural and civic life of the community. You could cut and paste some of that language and put it right onto recovery community centers. So let's go on to the next slide. So this was part of a movement. It was a part of the LGBT advocacy movement. And you think of our movement also in terms of a recovery advocacy. So it flourished in the 70s. And then so a lot of infrastructure was happening in terms of organizations and social services. And then in the 80s, during the AIDS crisis, the HIV care and other health and human services sort of dictated, built upon that infrastructure and sort of perfected it, brought it to the next level of organizational infrastructure. By 1990s, the movement has spread away from the cities and more to smaller counties and towns and municipalities. And then in 1994, again, this idea of a national infrastructure or oversight, overview organization, National Associations of LGBT Community Centers was formed. So that's 94. By 2004, 10 years later, they were actually able to, with resources, to hire a first staff and open national offices in DC. In 2008, the NALGBTCC, a little bit wordy and lettery, became Centerlink. So they simplified the name. And then in 2019, by that time, there's 256 members across the US and international and 9 staff for Centerlink. So, you know, it's a pretty consistent building. Part of the focus of Centerlink is to develop leadership for EDs and boards of centers, to expand capacity, build grassroots advocacy, build capacity of centers to respond to public health needs of the community, a network of youth centers and youth-oriented programs and technical assistance about how to do that. And then technical assistance to existing or newly forming centers. So, you know, a national organization is sort of seeing the development and sustainability and evolution of these centers. Let's go to the next slide. So, you know, again, the services and programs sort of vary, but these are sort of the core ones that happen in terms of, again, community outreach and civic engagement, social and recreation, but a whole other kinds of resources of legal services, physical and mental health, a lot of social services, of course, always computer centers and arts and cultural programs. So again, sounds very similar to a lot of things that we have built in recovery community centers. Let's go to the next one. So again, state and federal grants for funding diversity, individual donors, fundraising events, foundations, other. Very similar, but this idea of not one single source of funding, but a cobbled together diverse portfolio for funding, always really important for any organization, but certainly for centers, especially where brick and mortar and a building is involved. Let's go to the next slide. So Centerlink puts out an annual report, and I just thought these recommendations were really timely and maybe pertinent to us. Build financial capacity and stability of centers to keep these efforts going and keep these doors open. Continue to invest in racial equity and anti-racism work, certainly timely in our world today, and something that many of us are thinking about, how we need to re-look at what we've built and how we need to make them more culturally appropriate and more cognizant of some of the racial inequities that have happened in our society and that we may have replicated. Continue to invest in board and staff development to keep these centers going, and then to mobilize and expand the capacities of centers to engage in advocacy and public education. So, that's one of the prongs here, is that, and I'll talk about this in a little while, is that the idea of a center as a community organizing engine. So we'll talk about that when we get to that slide, but remember, the other folks are thinking about centers as a way to do this. Let's go to the next slide. So the third and last one we're going to look at is mental health clubhouses, because they're very close to us in terms of scope and temperament, right? So I wanted to talk about Fountain House, which started in 1948 in New York City, and that's sort of the first mental health clubhouse. There may be some before, but this is the one that's regarded as the turning point. And it came out of the experience of a group of people that were institutionalized in Rockland State Hospital. And then when they had created this sort of inner group of support with one another. And when they got discharged, and most of them were New York City based, they started meeting on the steps of the New York Public Library, just as a way of connecting with one another and keeping that energy and impetus going, that they had formed this group that was really, it was a peer group that was supportive of one another. And they formed this group called We Are Not Alone. And so they talked about this idea of social isolation as a determinant of not their health, but of their illness, and that they needed to find ways to break that social isolation. And so in 1948, they got support, they got resources, and they bought a building in New York City. So let's go to the next slide. So Fountain House is looked at as the model. And I don't want to keep on this too long, but it has been replicated to 300 locations in 30 countries. I think the difference is that it's not entirely peer run, but lots of peer run mental health clubhouses have branched off as a result of that. So I think it's an important thing to look at historically, but also to look at where the lived experience and run and owned and operated by the recovery community is important in many situations, maybe not always necessary, but something we certainly value and want to uplift in terms of not only where they're located in our community, but who's in charge. So let's go to the next slide. And then again, they have a national organization, an international organization that oversees the development and the replication and the accreditation of these. Okay, so I think we're time to move to part 2 and talk about recovery community centers. So let's go to the next slide. And
do we want to do the polling now?
You are in charge of the polling, Hazel.
Okay. Are you ready? Are you ready?
Yeah.
For me to share
Okay. So we're going to ask you to do 2 questions. Have you ever personally visited an RCC? And have you ever connected someone else with an RCC? Give you a few minutes to fill those out.
Okay, I think most of the results have rolled in now, so I'm going to share the results with everybody.
Well, that's great to know that many have, and it's also interesting to know that who hasn't, and maybe that's something that at the end of this presentation, you will want to go visit one, hopefully nearby where you're stationed, and also if you are in direct practice of any kind, that that you can sort of make those connections, or even a personal connection with somebody in a recovery community center. So let's go to the next slide. I know I'm moving fast, but I got a lot to say. So, I want to start with, this is not, again, not the beginning, but certainly something to look at as a turning point. So the Recovery Community Services Program was a SANSA-funded recovery initiative in 1998 designed for advocacy and public mobilization, and then moved to the focus shifted in 2001 with the second cohort of grantees. It shifted from advocacy to peer service. And through the course of that, grantees came up with things like recovery coaching and recovery community and lots of other things. So in 2004, I'll say this a little bit later, but CCAR opened up their Wyndham Recovery Community Center in 2004. And a couple months later, the RCSP, the technical assistance arm, conducted a 2-day skill building meeting in El Paso, Texas. And lots of grantees came to that. And CCAR, and I believe the LGBT Community Center, who was a grantee, helped people conceptualizing and starting up recovery community center. So like if you were going to do one, what would one look like? What kind of building would you look for? Where would you want it to be? How would you engage the community? Like all these kind of questions. And we worked through it. You can see this picture, lots of flip charts and lots of ideas generated, and help people sort of like get to the next level. After that 2-day meeting, people went back home and opened up, not everybody, but lots of recovery community centers. And so, that was a really fertile period in terms of people trying out things in this grantee cohort as a legitimate form of peer-based recovery support services. So let's move to the next, and they called them recovery community centers and put the community in there because at that time, recovery was becoming this sort of sexy word that treatment folks were starting calling treatment agencies recovery centers, still do. So we just wanted to make a distinction there. So I hope you all know about this document, What are Peer Recovery Support Services? Came out of SAMHSA, I think 2009. And it says a number of RCSP grantees have created recovery community centers as places where recovery happens. We all know that. Many types of peer service activities such as mentoring, coaching, connecting to resources, support, and educational groups take place at these centers. And at the core is the nurturing of a caring recovery community with shared norms and values, which is dedicated to support recovery for all who seek it. These centers bring recovery to Main Street and making the recovery visible, carrying a message of hope to the larger community. So that last part is also really important, that the shingle hangs out on Main Street that says Recovery Community Center, and people know what it is, and recovery is vital and vibrant and visible in the community. Big, big turning point, okay? So let's go to the next slide. So it's really interesting to look at what this place looks like. And the idea is the service is, the setting is the service. It's a place, it's a sanctuary, provides a welcoming and safe public space for individuals and families to convene in a recovery supportive environment. It's a hub for peer recovery support services and connections to recovery community resources, but it's also a service in itself. It's not a fee-for-service model, but people go there, it's a service. It's a place as a service. It's a really important concept. And the place, as I said earlier, is an engine for community organizing and advocacy, for volunteer and service opportunities. We talked about that earlier, and for leadership development and also stakeholder development with other entities in the community to pull them in and make recovery visible and also a player in the community. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the social model. And because I think a lot of people may or may not know about that, but it's a model that was developed in California in the 70s. I'm going to reference it a little in the next slide, but the basic premises of a recovery community center running on a social model valuing the knowledge and wisdom that's inherent in all communities, providing a sanctuary and a culture of recovery, understanding that recovery is a lifelong process and involves mutual peer support, that connection is so important for so many of us, and offering connection to community support and connection and resources. Let's go to the next slide. So my colleague and friend Jason Howe made this, I did it into a chart, but he made this an analogy. He built it off of an article about social model from Likas Kudus and Thomasina Borkman. And there's these 6 basic questions. Does the place feel like home? Are staff respected as peers versus distant superiors? Is authority based on lived experience? Is the program recovery oriented? Does accountability involve peers? And is the community viewed as a resource? And I think, he built this for recovery residences, for recovery homes and housing. But I think you can answer yes to all these questions. I hope you can, to recovery community centers. So this is a model to look at in terms of, and I hope more of you do some further research on this social model, because it's a good one to put forward in terms of how we go about doing things and why we go about doing it. So let's move on to the next. So I also just wanted to say, historically, the social model preceded a lot of things. It was embedded in housing in the 70s, but there were little upstarts of what they called neighborhood recovery centers in the 1980s. And these were really a precursor. I don't think they're that widespread, but they're an important moment in history. They were not drop-in centers, and they had 4 components: front desk, kitchen, meeting space, and living room space. And I've never seen recovery community centers sort of reduced to that sort of floor plan, but it makes a lot of sense in terms of, is someone greeted? Is there a coffee pot and refreshments? Is there places for recovery support? And is there a home-like atmosphere? So let's go to the next slide. So the other thing to look at is the AA Clubhouse. And so when recovery community centers were first starting, there was some confusion about what because clubhouses existed all over the country. So the first one started in 1940. It was started by co-founder of AA, Bill Wilson, and other people in his group. And he wrote this article in the Grapevine in 1947 and said, "Clubs in AA, are they here with us to stay?" And went through a number. That's an interesting article. Went through a number of sort of issues that were bubbling up. And that article got transferred over to a specific set of AA guidelines that established clubhouses as separate and autonomous from the Alcoholics Organization, although carried forth many of the culture attributes. So go to the next slide. I apologize for the blurriness of the guidelines, but it's widely available on the internet, and it really sort of walks through that the clubhouses are not AA, although they follow a lot of the traditions and a lot of the cultural aspects of AA. So it's a really important distinction that needs to be made in terms of the clubhouses are owned and governed by groups, not by AA. So let's go to the next slide. And this is something I drew up in 2004 as recovery community centers were evolving, or really just starting up, was to help people differentiate the difference between a clubhouse and the difference between a recovery community center. And there's similarities, but the specificity, devil's in the details, right? So I'm not going to go through this, but you all could have access to this in terms of hopefully having some clarity between these two things. That AA clubhouses are really important legacy, but it is not the same as a recovery community center. And those distinctions are really, really important. They can both exist, but they are not the same. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples, and Vermont's an important one because I had the first date here, 2001, but the more important date is 1999, when the first AA clubhouse got transformed to a recovery community center. And that happened in White River Junction, and the important thing about that is that there was movement in a direction to something more generic in a recovery culture and less AAs or 12-step specific. As a result of that and some other centers changing over, in 2006, the Vermont State Legislature created the Vermont Recovery Network, and this oversees the centers throughout the state. The funding filters through the Vermont Recovery Network and funds what are now 12 peer-run recovery centers in the state. And then the legislature sort of, in 2012 got evolved to actually let VRN be the instrument that would set the tone for standards and increase funding and promising practices across the centers, sort of a way to develop a statewide network, but also oversee how they were run in a consistent kind of way. So now 12 peer-run recovery centers across the state of Vermont. Let's move on to the next one. I just wanted to make mention of this because in 2014, Vermont Recovery Network started a medication-assisted treatment guide program. I'm not going to go into detail, but Vermont has a very highly regarded hub and spoke model between opioid treatment programs and office-based. So between methadone and buprenorphine, and that it's not just, I don't want to get into it because it's very good. It'll get me off track, but it's a very effective model of getting people with opioid use disorders connected to medication and treatment. And VRN started what they call peer guides that help people navigate that system in a recovery-oriented atmosphere. And so it's been a really engaging and important thing in terms of people accessing services and medication, but also always in a recovery context and helping them connect to peer supports, one-on-one, as well as peer group supports, and the recovery community centers as a place where recovery happens. Let's move on to the next slide. So I want to talk about, looking at my watch, I have to go through these fast. I told you CCAR started a center in 2004. They thought through a lot of issues, and they talked about putting a face on recovery, building recovery capital, and serving as this physical location to organize the community's ability to care. And they talked about it's not a 12-step club. Like I said earlier, it's not a drop-in center, although aspects of these are apparent. Let's move on. So now CCAR has 5. The first one, as I said, Willimantic, opened in 2004, and it's one in Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport, and Manchester. Let's move on. And so here's some of the things that happened there. And some of these were actually instigated by CCAR or perfected by CCAR. There are recovery meetings that any pathway, any substance, any behavior, anything you want to talk about, you talk about in the context of all recovery meetings, very popular across the country. And then a lot of other kinds of groups, they've really mastered telephone recovery support and always volunteer opportunities. Next slide. So out of that RCSP cohort came the Recover Project in Greenfield, Massachusetts. So I'm not going to tell you a lot about them, but here's the link to their manual. Really, really important. It really is how to build your own peer-to-peer recovery center from the ground up. And they really emphasize the philosophy of participatory process, where people are involved in every single aspect of the organization and program development. And I'll let you read this, but I'm not going to read it because we don't have time. Just a really important turning point. And if we go to the next slide, the BSAS, the Bureau of Substance Abuse Services in Massachusetts, initially funded 6 recovery centers. They call them peer recovery support centers. Recover Project was one of them, and was also sort of the incubator for a lot of the design of how these centers were developed and designed. And today, 27 peer recovery support centers funded by the state in Massachusetts. New York State's not far behind. There's 26 recovery and outreach centers. That's what they call them, funded by the Office of Addiction Services and Support, the state agency. And then in Vermont, you have 12 recovery centers supported by the state legislature. So these are 3 state models. I'm sure there's more that exist. Tell me if you know them so that I can include them. But it's really important that for sustainability, we talked about that federal, state, local funding, really, really important in terms of keeping this effort going. And I was just corrected by Julio, who says that there's 28 peer recovery support centers in Massachusetts. Let's go to the next slide. So a couple of last things. There's other models that I just want you to know about, and there's probably more than I don't know about, but one is the Recovery Cafe in Seattle. And this started, it's largely focuses on the homeless population, but everybody and anybody is welcome. It is a cafe that serves coffee, but also meals free. It's in a really nice spot, and they have a lot of recovery programming throughout. And so this started in 2003, 2004 in Seattle. They have a replication project called Recovery Cafe Network. And I'm going to go to the next slide because they have 23 cafes in 10 states and 1 Canadian province. And a lot of the similar goals and values and principles are the same as any other recovery community center. It just has a slightly different spin and one worth looking at. Let's go to the next slide. I also want to talk about Dry Hooch in Milwaukee, which has 7 replications in 5 states. This started in 2010, and it was really open for vets, by vets, really in addressing the number of young vets that were coming back from Afghanistan and other war zones in the Middle East, and coming back to a lot of disconnected supports and communities. So they designed this coffee house, and out of that, a lot of different programs grew. So it is definitely recovery based. It is SUD based, but it's connected to so many other things that are pertinent to that community and to many communities. Mental health issues, trauma, PTSD, suicide prevention, lots of things to help people feel connected. And again, connected to one another and supported by a community that's something bigger than themselves. So just a couple more slides. Some of the examples across the country, and I just tried to give a smattering of different kinds of locations, but again, we could fill this up in many, many slides. I want to talk about Recover Wyoming and Cheyenne in a rural and frontier area. Sandusky Artisans Recovery Community Center on Lake Erie in Ohio. Mo Network in St. Louis, APA in Dallas, longstanding Recovery Community Center, and Recovery Communities of North Carolina. Like I said, lots of more, and I'm sorry I left you out. And then the last slide is really about current trends that I'm seeing and other people are seeing, and we want to be capturing these. So RCCs have been incredible hubs of naloxone distribution and have started to also to connect with harm reduction organizations in a really important and meaningful way. And out of that have come some programs that are hybrid recovery programs, a mixture of abstinence, harm reduction, and medication, all recovery, but different pathways and different ways of getting there. RCCs have really had to pivot during COVID, and I just want to take my hat off to all of you and all of the work you have done to make your centers as viable as possible during these really trying times in this really difficult year. And just to thank you so much for keeping your doors open in any way you can, and to be as mobile and as nimble as you can to serve our people. So thank you for that. Hopefully that'll end soon, but you've come up with some really important and innovative ways to serve people in recovery. And then all recovery meetings, as I talked about earlier, but then there's some new programming to look at. First of all, Unity and Alana Club, I think were the first out the gate in mid-March to do online meetings, all recovery meetings. And it was like a godsend to many of us, and it sort of helped other people develop that. But they're at Unity in Philadelphia, they have this program really worth looking at, social determinants of recovery workshops, and looking at the social determinants of health, recovery capital, and health equity. And then the Alana Club in Portland, Oregon. So you have something that was initially a AA clubhouse, a 12-step clubhouse, is now a recovery community. So they have a recovery gym, they call Recovery Toolkit, Artists in Recovery. And I just want to say that there's lots of creative programming that has been happening in the centers themselves and also branching out into the community as we look at the power of centers and the way that they are being implemented both as a place and an extended place. So I think that's it. We covered a lot. I took you through a lot of stuff. I know it was a little bit of a whirlwind, but I'm so honored to share this stuff with you. I think about it a lot. I think about all these things a lot, and I'm always just so grateful to be among you, especially the ones of you that are on the ground doing the actual day-to-day heavy lifting work. So thank you very much.
Thank you so.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
woo was right.
Thank you.
My head's on fire.
Thank you for that awesome presentation, Tom. Let me open the floor for questions. We do have 2 questions I saw in the chat. But so shall I start with those while people formulate them?
Yeah.
So we had Nancy asking, are any recovery community centers working with other recovery centers like senior centers to volunteer and assist? Seems like that would be a natural connection where those in recovery could gain skills, etc.
You know, I don't know. And I think that that's worth pursuing. It's worth asking. I think anything that we can do to connect with other communities is always a good thing. And to build in, to sort of broaden out our network that includes lots of other recovery organizations, recovery housing, collegiate programs, like this incredible network, but that also includes other communities. And it has this whole sort of olive branch thing happening where we're extending ourselves, but also really enriching our experience and letting people know what recovery looks like from the inside out.
Can I speak for a second?
Mm-hmm.
This is Zach at USARA, Ogden, Utah. We do a lot of work with all kinds of other places, Ogden Narcan, naloxone. Here in Ogden, I work side by side with the LNO Club. They're still AA based. In USARA, we're all pathways. We support anything that you need to recover and what recovery looks like for the individual. We do a lot of work with Family Drug Court. Drug Court will sit down during family team meetings for DCFS. Yeah, just in a lot of halfway houses, sober living places, recovery places. And we're just basically the middleman to a connection of recovery out there it's everywhere. And I mean, and I heard somebody say they had the best recovery center in the world, but we got the best recovery community here in Ogden. And I just like to let everybody know that it's possible. You got to get out there and advocate for yourself and know your justice system, know your clubs, know your meetings. I mean, I've been working I came up in AA and I've been working so hard to show NA and AA and all the other recovery communities that all pathways is a good thing, and I'm making progress in that, and for sure.
Thank you for your experience. That's really nice sharing. Really appreciate that, and glad your USARA is really connected in that way throughout the entire community.
So there's a couple more questions trickling in. Let me get them in the order which I saw them. So Jeffrey Stewart asked, what are your thoughts on CAPRSS or accreditation in general?
So Patty McCarthy, I think next month is going to, from Face and Voice of Recovery, is going to be talking about CAPRS. And, you know, I have a little bit of a bias toward it because I helped develop it. And I think, you know, the whole idea was that we set our own standards and then we held each other in the community a feet to the fire in terms of maintaining those standards. So I believe in it totally. And I think that so it's for and by the community, but it also, there's a rigor to it. And I think it shows a level of consistency, the way centers are owned and operate. It shows that they are definitely peer involved in participatory process from the beginning to end. And that that we are also accountable in terms of funders, in terms of what we do and how we do it and what kind of outcomes that we're able to deliver. So yeah, I think CAPRIS is a really good thing, and Patty will sort of walk you through that more next month. But I think if you think about the accreditation that happens in senior centers or LGBT community centers, those are really important things in terms of creating that consistent network.
Great. Then the other question, and these are, well, one of them is related. Do you believe RCC should be run by recovery community organizations, so organizational structure is led by peers? And that I think is related to that.
Well, when we developed CAPRIS, we developed it so that the standards were such that if you were a treatment organization that had a peer program, if you could meet all of those standards, then you could be accredited. And I think that shows that fidelity to the model. So if an organization that's not a recovery community organization has gives a certain amount of autonomy to that project and lets it run itself within the larger organization and can meet those standards, that's fine. But I think ultimately it has to be a recovery culture. It has to come out of a recovery experience for them to work. And so anything else that doesn't is not going to, it won't be in those standards, but it also won't have fidelity to that model that we know that if people with lived experience are involved in every single aspect, if they drive the project, then it will have the kinds of outcomes and results that we know we're capable of.
Great. Then we have a bunch of science questions here about systematic reviews and what we currently know within science about it. And that's really one of the big reasons why we are here. There hasn't, in the scientific literature, there's not enough, not nearly enough, or barely anything on recovery community centers. And that's why we're here talking with you all, so we can start writing up the great diversity of models that exist and approaches that exist to really educate folks who are doing research in this area to what's already there and what we are building on. So we will, I see some questions see about some slides that I gave for presentations I gave, which I'm happy to put on the website as well. And we'll pull together some of our papers that we have written on RCCs in the New England area. So we'll put those on the website where you'll also find the slides here.
Bettina, here in Vermont, we also just recently had a student take up a study on our data that we collect for the 12 recovery centers throughout Vermont. And she put forth a thesis on quality of life indicators and participation. So I would love the opportunity to speak with you after this meeting or at a later time. And
Absolutely.
I would be most remiss if I didn't point out that Mr. Robert Purvis is also on this webinar, and he was one of the founding members of the Vermont Recovery Network some time ago.
I would love to. I would love to include your student in that conversation. That'd be great. Love that. And did I miss questions? Katie Hazel, what questions? Because I was also paying attention to, actually our spoken word, not our written word only. What other questions did I miss meanwhile?
I see one on engaging volunteers, specific ways. I think, you know, the thing about a volunteer workforce, first of all, most centers operate because of volunteers. Volunteers aren't just free labor. And I think, you know, like CCAR is sort of calculating the importance of the monetary value. That's really great. You can't have a volunteer workforce, but you almost need a volunteer coordinator on staff to do it right. To really, because volunteers need to be nurtured, they need the meaningful, important work. So some of them can be greeters, some of them can be wall painters, some of them can be peers who run programs. It's, you know, it runs the gamut of how you can connect volunteers into the running of your recovery center. But no matter how you do it, you're getting authentic lived experience at every level of the organization and giving people service opportunities, which is so important, whether you're inside a 12-step program or you want to broaden that out in terms of the larger recovery community.
I have a question, Tom.
Yeah.
So I read an article some years ago that you had written about creating a peer workforce. And I remember how motivating that was as a person in long-term recovery entering a professional workforce for one of the first times in my life. Are we still of that school of thought?
Can you say what the school of thought is again?
The school of thought is that what we're really doing is the idea is to build a workforce for people entering and living in long-term recovery.
It's not an easy question to ask, because I think, volunteers working at a center, or we always wanted to have peers be volunteers if they wanted to, and then later the idea of getting paid for that became sort of an issue, and I think there's room for all levels here. I think that along with the workforce comes a career track, and I think that's it's important to have peers working on the ground in the community. I also think if it's done correctly, it's important to have peers working in different systems and service settings, because it's a way, if it's done intentionally, it's a way of building out a recovery-oriented system of care through the initial level of peers entering the workforce, because organizations and systems have to make lots of adjustments in order to do that right. And when I say do that right, it's accept peers and their lived experience in the way that's the most valuable and has equal value with every other profession that's in that workforce. And so I believe in that firmly. I think lived experience equals lived expertise, and that we always have to uphold that, as we are experts in our own recovery and experts in sharing that lived experience with other people in recovery and other people in the field.
Thank you. That was an excellent answer.
Well, sadly, we've come to the end of our time today. And I see people clicking off, but we just want to, people can hang on if they want, but we do want to kind of bring it to a close and thank Tom formally for a great presentation. Tom, thank you so much. And for, providing such a stimulus for great discussion and conversation and great questions. We have all your questions. Thank you for documenting your questions and comments in the chat. That means a lot. We have that in the archive. We'll keep that. That's going to be part of this initiative in terms of stimulating further research. So thank you for that. And thank you all for coming. I'll turn it back to Bettina. Don't forget, January the 15th at noon is our next one in the series. So hope to see you all there. And back to you, Bettina.
I am muted, my bad. So thank you, John. Tom, there's a couple more questions that I saw here. Do you have a few more minutes to answer them for those who can stay beyond our limit, or should we pick those up at another time?
I have something I have to be at 1 o'clock, but I will be a couple minutes late. So yes, I can be available.
All right, let me do them quickly. There's the question, there's a desire to hear more about federal funding for RCCs and its future, and any concerns about loss of recovery identity when you're relying on state and federal funding. And then on a different topic was are there any success stories for rural RCCs and rural locations?
So I'm looking up, I'm on a conversation today. There's actually some, hold on. There's in the COVID relief bill that's sort of pending in Congress right now, there's a movement of recovery advocates there's some language in there about peer recovery services. It's very vague. So I'm in a meeting this afternoon to talk about how we can make that language a little bit more, or not a little bit, a lot more explicit about where that money's going to go. So there's more opportunities than there's ever been. But it's, it's still piecemeal. So I think, we've come a long way in terms of funding. CSAT and SAMHSA have actually gotten a little bit better about funding recovery initiatives. But I think, I don't have a great answer, but I have a hopeful answer, in that, the more advocacy we do on a state and federal level, the more money that's going to be earmarked for recovery community centers and other, peer type of organizations. So it's not a great answer, but it's a hopeful. So keep your fingers crossed.
Awesome, thank you. All right. Other questions that I've missed, or otherwise, I would want to go ahead and wish you all a very happy holiday season. I hope everybody gets some rest. We're almost at the end of 2020, which seems like a huge accomplishment this year.
Excuse me, I have a question. I had inbox like if I could get a copy of the material, like when you're.
Absolutely. We will send an email out. We also put in chat where the materials are. We will send an email out where you can get the slides, the video recording, and then if you email us back the chat as well, a text, basically text document with all the chat we had here. Happy to share.
And
I
like
just
I
leave
said,
the link in the chat if anyone wants to bookmark it.
I'm sorry, what'd you say?
In the chat, Hazel put the link where all materials will be posted. So if you want to just click on it now, you have it straight away. And it's going to take us a little bit of time to download the video and upload it, but that's where it will be. And that's the materials from a previous seminar.
Okay, thank you.
And Johnny, like I said, feel free to use any or all of it in your presentations as you see fit.
Okay. Thanks a lot for the feedback.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah,
Happy
thank you
holidays.
all for being here and sharing your thoughts and your questions. And Tom, absolutely inspiring. Thank you so much for putting this all together for us.